We're now live on YouTube, Chair.
Thank you very much, Raj. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sustainable Communities EAP. Obviously, we have a little bit of a change of personnel. I apologise for not being Harriet at this late stage in our administration. But I'd like to just, whilst I have the opportunity, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Harriet for everything that she has done and the work that she's done with you guys along the way. Looking ahead at our second agenda item, the sort of the program update of all the reports that you've looked at over the life of this EAP. It's really pretty impressive. So thank you to Harriet. I will do my absolute best to step into her shoes and take you through our last few months as we lead up to the elections, and hopefully you'll find the EAP just as rewarding as I know you have done so far. With no further delay, let's go to apologies. I think there are no apologies, Raj, is that right?
Yeah, I've received no apologies.
Okay, fine. We've got some bit more people turning up. That's marvellous. So any members' declarations of interest? Des?
Yeah, it might come up. I work for Brightways, who are engaged with active travel and sustainable transport. Also, I don't know if this counts, but my garden floods a lot.
I'm not sure, but we thank you for letting us know that. Anybody else? I can't see any other hands up. Lovely. So if we turn then to the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of December, is everybody happy that they are a true record of the meeting? That is lovely. I'm seeing lots of nods, which is always a good thing. There's Jan. Everybody's turning up. That's great. So that's lovely. We'll then, in that case, move straight on to the flooding and climate adaptation presentation that Ryan Keat is going to take us through. Good morning, Ryan. Welcome. If you'd like to perhaps introduce yourself and then take us through your report, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, no problem. So my name's Ryan Keat. I'm a senior flood and water officer within NNC. And I'm not particularly a favour of Zoom. Teams is my normal medium, so I'll try and share my screen and hopefully it will work. Let me know if you can see that on there.
We can.
Yeah. Fantastic, good news. So I appreciate this is supposed to be around 15 minutes. I like the sound of my voice. My voice a little bit too much, so I might run over. If I do, please feel free to tell me to be quiet or hurry up, and I'll go as quickly as I can. So, as I said, my name is Ryan Keat. I'm a senior flood and water officer within NNC, and today I want to spend a few moments just talking around flooding in North Northamptonshire and kind of the impact the climate is having on that. So in terms of an agenda, I'll try and keep it short and sweet. As I said, I do like the sound of my own voice a little bit too much. So first of all, we're going to talk around what flooding looks like for North Northamptonshire. Then we'll talk around sort of understanding climate change a little bit and what that means for us and how that looks. Then about how self-sort flooding can occur, some typical challenges we face, and then followed by kind of a bit of a strategic oversight of what we're looking to do to address some of those issues in the long term. I delivered a similar presentation to this last Thursday at the member training session. So for anyone which attended that, there might be a little bit of overlap here, but hopefully there'll be some little bits which are a little bit different. And if not, I apologize in advance. So it's important to understand the nature of flooding in Northamptonshire. And it's super varied and it's really widespread. As you can see from the graphic on screen, sort of all four corners of Northamptonshire get affected by flooding in different ways. And there's kind of four mechanisms in which that can occur. So you've got surface water flooding, and that often affects urban areas where drainage systems are overwhelmed during heavy rainfall. Then you have ordinary watercourse flooding and main river flooding, and I'll sort of group those together. And that can happen when smaller streams and ditches start to overflow if they surcharge. And it's often exacerbated massively when there are blockages or if those channels or those rivers are poorly maintained. And then finally, something which isn't quite so prevalent but still happens is groundwater flooding. And this occurs when there's prolonged wet weather. It causes a sort of a localized raising of the groundwater table, and then ultimately results in groundwater emanating through the surface and then causing flooding. Our area has seen significant flood events since I've been a poster and long before me. For example, the Easter floods of 1998, which were somewhat before my time, when I was a solid 4 years of age. The UK started naming storms in 2015. This was a result of the fact that they were becoming more frequent and more severe as time sort of evolved. And that really started to hit home with North Northamptonshire in 2023. 2023 was particularly wet. There was 1,290 millimeters of rainfall experienced, and that made it the UK's 11th wettest year on record, going back all the way to 1836. 2024 has also been record-breaking for all the wrong reasons, and it saw 1,242 millimeters of rainfall, and that's made it the 8th wettest winter and 6th wettest spring on record. In late 2024 alone, we commissioned 7 Section 19 investigations, the first of which are due to be published imminently. So either today, tomorrow, or Friday. I'll give myself a 3-day window, so I can't be shouted at too much if I miss it. So now there's a picture on the screen, and you're probably thinking, why on earth are you showing me a picture of a polar bear? But this is kind of how the mainstream media communicate the topic of climate change to the masses. It absolutely is a consequence of climate change, there's no doubt. But it's very, very difficult for you or I to put ourselves in the position of a polar bear. I've never seen a polar bear in the wild. I may never see a polar bear in the wild, and I'm sure many of you are the same. So it's really, really difficult to relate to kind of feel like, yes, this is climate change, and yes, this absolutely is something which is happening, and yes, this absolutely is a bad thing. But sat in the comfort of your own home, like I am today, it's very difficult to see that that's happening. This is what I know happens in North Northamptonshire, and this is what climate change looks like for us. Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Historically, these shifts have always occurred, and naturally, but they occur over thousands of years. However, in recent decades, human activities, primarily the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, increase in industrial processes, they've accelerated this change, and that's the difference. These activities release CO2 and methane, and that traps heat within the Earth's atmosphere. This quite simply results in a warming planet, and this has a cascading effect on weather systems. The key impact from a flooding perspective is the change this has on rainfall patterns. So we're experiencing a few different things. So firstly, more frequent heavy rain events, which can overwhelm drainage systems. Shorter but more intense downpours, and these can lead to flash flooding. And then also there's a shift and an ongoing shift at present in seasonal rainfall patterns, which makes it really hard to predict when and how flooding might occur. So we're already seeing increased surface water flooding in urban areas and higher risks of river flooding due to this prolonged wet weather. So as we plan for the future, it's important to remember that the effects of climate change aren't static. It's kind of an ever-changing and ever-moving goalpost, as it were. So what we plan for today, and that could be a 1 in 100-year storm event, might not be sufficient a decade from now or even 5 years from now. And this really highlights the importance of adaptive kind of planning with everything we do and kind of building in enough resilience for everything we do. Ultimately, though, flooding is a natural process, but human activity coupled with climate change has significantly increased its frequency and its impact to everyday life. So we've continued to replace natural landscapes with impermeable surfaces, and we reduce the land's natural ability to absorb water. The increase in the volume of surface water and surface runoff also accelerates how quickly it can reach rivers and drainage. Development, when well thought out and well designed, is generally, in my opinion, a good thing. It stimulates social and economic growth, but it does come with design challenges. So this is a graph on screen which shows kind of two things. So the blue line is sort of greenfield, so that's pre-development. So as you can see, the time on both of these two graphs is exactly the same. You have a slow, gradual peak. That's a long drawn out process because the water, for example, is coming down the field slowly, beginning to rise, but by the time it's soaked away, some more has come, but that's all kind of, this all keeps that nice slow peak. The difference with the red dash line is a poorly sort of thought out, say, historic drainage system, which was designed without attenuation or flow control in mind. And what you have is a much faster peak. So obviously, impermeable surfacing, water can run across that impermeable surface far quicker, can enter into drainage networks. Drainage networks are obviously extremely good at conveying water. That's what they're designed to do. But what that means, if you haven't designed that with attenuation, the climate, downstream impacts in mind, is you're essentially accelerating that water into the watercourse. That then sort of results in this reduced time to peak, so it happens faster and there's much more of it. Then obviously all the water is being conveyed very quickly. Once the storm event finishes, it's already got there, then it drops off. What we want to do and what good development looks like is trying to mimic the blue line as opposed to the red dash line. Hopefully I've kind of described that, and that's kind of where the whole peak flow or greenfield runoff and peak flow should be, as part of good development, the same. So greenfield runoff rate is also known as Q bar, which some of you might have heard of before, and that is essentially where the lower peak arrow currently points to on the graph. So that would be what Q bar is, and ideally, and any sort of design and development from this day and the last few years forward need to mean that that red higher peak matches the blue lower peak, if that makes sense. So I wanted to talk about sort of challenges, and you can see on screen 4 things which I commonly get told, and they're sort of the most common suggestions when discussing flood mitigation. So just upsize your drainage network. And at first glance, this seems like a pretty straightforward solution. If the pipes are bigger, they can carry more water. Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. If we increase the pipe sizes, we increase the outflow, the peak flow, and the pipe size, they're all intrinsically linked. So if we were to upsize them but not regulate the flow, we would just be sending the problem to somebody else downstream, and then that's not particularly responsible. So designs are always based on standards, and flooding is expected. So for example, if a network is designed to only allow surcharge, so full pipes, but no flooding in a 1 in 5 year event, plus an allowance for climate change, what happens when we then encounter a storm that exceeds that standard, so a 1 in 10 year event? The reality is flooding is inevitable. No matter how much we expand our infrastructure, we cannot design for every single possible event. Cost versus benefit also comes into it. Obviously, cost is the difficult thing to talk about, but at the end of the day, everybody does have a limit. So upsizing the entire network of a particular area would require massive investment, and the marginal gain in resilience might not actually justify the expenditure. So, for example, if you have experienced flooding in one area for the first time in 50 years, for example, is spending £500,000 to upsize that entire network to mitigate that one storm event worth it for the next 100 years when it might only happen once more or twice more? If it happens 10, 15, 20 times more, maybe it then becomes more viable. This is where it becomes difficult. And practical limits. So even with larger pipes, water must still go somewhere. In extreme events, natural landscapes and storage solutions often provide the only overflow capacity. Instead of solely focusing on upsizing, we also need to kind of think about it a bit more holistically. So this includes natural flood management solutions, restoring wetlands, create flood storage areas, along with more traditional engineering means. So oversized pipes, crates. And by diversifying strategy, it allows us to build resilience that works in both scenarios. So next up, we'll sort of look at install more gullies. And this kind of builds on my previous point. But installing more gullies can absolutely be a viable solution sometimes. When there's localized surface water ponding and it's a conveyance or a drawdown problem, so there just isn't enough assets in a specific area, that might work. But more often than not, the root cause of that flooding isn't the number of gullies in a particular area. It's more the fact that the system is already at or beyond its capacity. So yes, additional gullies may collect and convey more water, but ultimately, all we're really doing is we're exacerbating an underlying issue more. So for example, many of these systems discharge into a ditch or a watercourse. If the outfall becomes surcharged or hydraulically blocked, so if the ditches fill up and it doesn't allow any discharge, it doesn't matter how many gullies you install, the water simply doesn't have anywhere to go. So the flooding issue will continue, and we'll have spent, for example, 15, 20,000 pounds putting in additional gullies. Clearing the ditches is another sort of thing we get told. This is a difficult one for multiple reasons, mainly the fact that ownership now comes into play. So clearing the ditches, highway ditches, aren't often the responsibility of the highway authority. They're typically the responsibility of the riparian owner. And this means we have limited control over that maintenance activity. So we can contact, and we do contact regularly, landowners to remind them of their duties as riparian owners. Enforcing action is difficult, and ensuring ongoing upkeep is even harder. So we absolutely can, if absolutely necessary, carry out works and then look to charge the cost back to the landowner. But this is very difficult, and this is where sort of my job becomes challenging, because that isn't really in the spirit of collaboration, and it often leads to lengthy legal processes to recover funds. And worse still, we can go through that process once to clear an asset, but then what happens if it blocks again next year? Do we then repeat? And it's just kind of an ever-going cycle, which will repeat year on year, and it makes long-term maintenance really difficult. And then we've got clear and jet assets. So maintenance absolutely is a thing, absolutely needs to be done. Completely agree. It's one of the most challenging things in my line of work in drainage. But clearing and jetting assets is a significant challenge, given that NNC alone have 50,000 gullies before even considering culverts and pipe systems. So maintenance is absolutely essential. Maintenance absolutely needs to be undertaken to ensure full functionality. But we can only clear what we can access. So for example, if a crew have been sent out to site to a particular street and all of the vehicles have parked over the assets, we can't access them. And because of the number of gullies, this crew needs to be somewhere else tomorrow. So all of a sudden, you can kind of see where the problem starts. They can't then get back to that street to clear one asset, because then that's going to be at the detriment of the next street. And this is where the challenge comes in. Drainage networks, as I said, kind of aren't designed to deal with every flood event possible. So 2 reasons: it's impossible to predict every storm event, and B, drainage networks would be incredibly oversized, which isn't sustainable. One really key point to remember is sustainability has 3 pillars. It's not just environment, there's also the social and economic pillars. And for something to be truly sustainable, it needs to kind of sit in that balancing point whereby it meets all 3. So as I mentioned before, our designs are based on standards. So let's just take the design manual for roads and bridges as an example, which is national highways, admittedly not local authority, but typically all local authorities kind of loosely reference the DMRB as part of their design standards. So the DMRB asks for 3 criteria to be met for a design to be considered compliant. It needs to have no surcharge, so no pipes being filled within a 1 in 1 year, no flooding in a 1 in 5 year, and no flooding outside of the highway boundary for a 1 in 100 year. And all of these include a climate change allowance depending on the region you're on. So this essentially means that any event between a 1 in 5 and a 1 in 100 year is going to result in flooding of some description. It also means that anything more severe than a 1 in 100 year will likely flood outside of that area and impact other locations. So you might be thinking, so what is a 1 in 100 year event? That's something that happens every 100 years. And that's a common misconception. A 1 in 100 year event has a 1% probability of happening in one location at any given time. So this is what I mean. Flooding is almost always inevitable. So if a highway floods following a 1 in 60 year storm, for example, but it didn't leave the carriageway boundary, then in the opinion of the overseeing authority and the designer, that network is doing its job, it's performing its function. If we were to upsize the network to ensure that 1 in 60 year event didn't result in flooding, from a sustainability perspective, we would then be able to satisfy that social pillar, because everybody would be particularly happy that their houses or their property or their vehicles or their route to work is better protected. But then it impacts the other 2 pillars of sustainability. So economically, we've then had to spend significantly more funds to bring a network up to standards to satisfy a requirement it didn't previously need to. From an environmental perspective, we've had to use more materials. Those materials have probably been heavier. So construction has expelled more CO2. Decommission, when that comes around, it's 50 to 60 years after the design life. We have to then go and look to recycle or take those materials used to landfill. And that's how you can see the balancing point is really, really challenging to actually achieve. And sometimes people get it wrong. So to help address some of these challenges, it's all well and good saying these are all the challenges and kind of not coming up with solutions. So we're developing a comprehensive framework, which is starting as I speak, and it's going to be completed throughout the rest of 2025. As many of you know, the local flood risk management strategy, easy for me to say, so from now on I'll refer to it as the LFRMS. It's currently out of date and it should really be refreshed on a 5-year cycle. This hasn't been refreshed since 2017, which predates NNC as we know it now. So what we want to do is we want to kind of make this worth the wait. So what we're proposing is a 3-phase approach. So firstly, we're going to complete a strategic flood risk assessment. This assessment is going to look to evaluate flood risk across the region, providing data to guide planning policy, capital schemes, and community support. We will then supplement this with a water cycle study. So this study will examine how water resource can be managed sustainably as our population grows, ensuring we balance development needs and environmental protection. And then finally, we will then produce the local flood risk management strategy. This will take into account all the information we've gathered and will allow us to outline priorities and realistic, achievable actions for managing localized flooding. And it will really set the foundations for the next 5 years of our decisions. So what that should do is enable us to make informed decisions based on fact as opposed to fiction. A lot of this information we have already, obviously, with all of you guys submitting flood events and everything like that. We're beginning to build a picture of areas which are of note. But the idea is we want to have an LFRMS, which is actually meaningful as opposed to just a regurgitation of what the combined LFRMS was back in 2017. We don't basically just want to strip out WNC from it and say, there we go, we finished now. We want it to actually mean something, to be worth it, to be up to date, to align with the goals and priorities of the council, and actually be able to produce a document that we're kind of proud of as a team to be like, look, this is how we're going to do it. And not only that, we want something which you guys are going to be able to read and be like, actually believe that you can do this because of the fact that you've done the other 2 documents to prove it's possible. Just in closing, report flood events. So this is a key point and something which I like to bang the drum a lot. Without you guys, your constituents, members of the public, anybody reporting flood events, it's really, really difficult for us to know what has happened, where it's happened, why it's happened. Your experience of kind of living it is the most invaluable experience from our perspective to actually understand the root cause of an issue. So please, can I encourage you and continue to encourage you to report your flood events. These flood events tie into your Section 19 investigations, which kind of can get capital schemes off the ground. As I said, we've already commissioned 7 in recent times, which are going to start to look towards building our capital works program in the future. Section 19 investigations feed into your capital schemes. They can direct people into the realms of rain projects and things like that. 2 examples at present: Warren Bridge in Oundle. They experienced a lot of internal flooding. They reported their flood events. Section 19 investigation was commissioned. There was a clear issue. Capital scheme has been procured, and a flood wall is going to be constructed in the not too distant future to protect those properties. Eastbrook Culvert, much more high profile in the terms of how long that sort of culvert is, the number of properties affected. Very similar thing. Flood report, Section 19 investigation has been procured for multiple areas along that route. Capital scheme in train, and that's kind of where I would like to close. So any questions?
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was a whistle-stop tour, but I think really comprehensive, and it's probably given us plenty of food for thought, and I'm sure will generate some questions and feedback from the panel. So if I can just look around the room and see if there's anybody who wants to speak, ask questions, have a thought. I'm having a little look. There we go. So I've got Councillor Desdell first. So Councillor Desdell, if you'd like to say what you have to say.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks Ryan for that. So I just dropped my notes. So yeah, I've got a few questions. I'm glad you mentioned Eastbrook Culvert at the end there. As you guessed, I might mention that since that's the culvert that runs at the bottom of my garden that floods. So you mentioned I'll cover that first, and then I'll do the other questions. Section you mentioned there's a section 19 procured for that, which is great because the last time I saw you, I think you were out on my street trying to clear some drains, and then you were going off to try and find the source of the East Brook. So I presume investigations are ongoing. I know you got £425,000 from the Anglian Northern Regional Flood and Coastal Committee to investigate that. So I was just wondering if you had an update on what the money's been spent on, if you found the source of the brook, and what's going on with that. That's my first question, and I've got some others as well if you wanted to do them.
Yeah, if we could tier them, that'd be lovely. Just to make life easier. So Eastbrook Culvert is difficult. As you know, and Councillor Dale, we've spoken about this before. The funding situation is also a challenge. The Environment Agency at present are currently in a position whereby I don't know if you know around the cycle they currently operate on, but they essentially operate typically on sort of 5 to 6 year cycles. What they're currently doing is trying to condense their current cycle to align their next cycle better with the funding they have available. A lot of this has been to do with the changes in government which have recently taken place. And it essentially means that funding for Eastbrook Culvert in this financial year is no longer there. Next financial year, we will have some funding. The exact figure I would need to go away to my notes and confirm, but I believe it's in the region of around £150,000. What we will be looking to do with that is exactly as you said, look to actually undertake much more thorough investigation. So I've been out on site. It was great to kind of see you out on site as well, and also for you to see us on site. So hopefully you kind of have a bit of confidence that we are taking this situation, this problem seriously. But we're going to use that money to look to trace as much of that culvert as possible. We've done a lot. We basically, on the day you saw us, we were looking at kind of your area. We went back again a few weeks after to look towards the more northern section to actually try and find the source. We failed. Really, really weird arrangement. I'm not going to get into the technical detail of it. There we were finding all kinds of strange things. Every chamber which was lifted was something we didn't expect. So what we want to do is we want to get back out again with a full camera crew and survey the entire length, and hopefully get the answers which I'm still looking for as to where that base flow within that culvert comes from, because I've got no idea. So hopefully but that's essentially what we're going to be doing. So we're going to be doing lots more surveys, and what we want to do, obviously, we're going to be spending a significant sum of money at some point in the future to conduct a capital scheme. What form that's going to take at this present time, I don't know. But what we don't want to do is it's going to be one of those things where we're going to get one shot and we've got to get it right.
Yeah.
So appreciate it's going to be frustrating to hear, more investigations. So you've been doing investigations. We absolutely have. But so far, the investigations and the data which we've got, I'm disproving as I'm finding more. So I don't want to run before we can walk. I want to have firm ground to be able to make my decision on as to how we move forward. And we can only do that by doing more investigation. So that's Eastbrook Culvert.
Brilliant. Thanks for that update, Ryan. Thank you. Just to explain to all the other councillors, the Eastbrook runs from the north of Kettering underground in culverts through down to the south of Kettering and then joins the Slade Brook. Because of how it was developed, there's no mapping because all the different housing estates sort of culverted it at different times. When my house was built in the 30s, I've got some of my deeds about letting sheep and chickens drink from the stream at the bottom of that kind of thing, So that's why there's no sort of like, yeah. Okay, on the note there then, I was wondering, because I've met Flood Mary a few times, Mary Longdonahue, OBE, and I noticed she was one of the big issues 100 change makers of 2024, which was quite cool. She does a lot of outreach with residents that are affected by flooding. I think the Floodmobile, which I visited about 3 years ago, is now not on the road anymore. But I was wondering, are there plans to do outreach to residents affected by flooding to sort of show them the flood resilience measures that are available? That's that question.
Yeah, so it's definitely something which we've explored. Again, comes down to kind of funding and finding the right spot to sort of put Mary to get the most impact. So if you go on to sort of Flood Mary's website, you can see kind of places she drops in and out of, and appreciate that that means sometimes that not everybody can access one side of NNC when they live in the other at that particular date and time. So that's definitely something which if there is proven to be enough kind of uptake, it's something and desire for her to visit a particular area, it's definitely something we can explore more.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because a part of that I think is establishing like a flood wardens network, and I don't know if there are flood wardens elsewhere in the county, but that seems like a really good idea for for residents to get involved with, to be able to sort of alert other people in the area and stuff. That's
Yeah, absolutely. That's it's kind of me cruising a little bit into the emergency planning space, which I'll try and avoid because I'm not an expert in emergency planning. But yeah, we can probably take that up offline, Councillor Dale, and I will put you in contact with emergency planning as well to have a discussion with them to set that up.
brilliant, brilliant. I know I've heard a lot about the Rain Project. I know Sarah Parr that runs that. I heard she was on she was on Radio Northampton on Monday talking about the project at Harper's Brook. Are you involved much with the Rain Project? Do you have much?
No, I'm not. So Rain Project is exactly that. It's Sarah Parr and Alan Ryan. They're doing a fantastic job, but it's the scope of Rain is quite niche, and that's what makes it quite difficult, because then everyone hears about Rain, oh, come help me, but they kind of can't because they're constrained by the scope of their project. But yeah, so I'm not particularly involved, apart from I have an awareness of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it sounds like they're doing great things with like landowners and farmers, leaky dams, and trying to do this natural flood management, which sounds great. Only a couple more questions, don't worry. So you mentioned the strategic planning, the LFRMS. That sounds great. I'm going to ask the obvious question. Do you have a timeline for when that will be completed?
I'd love to give you a concrete date. I definitely can't do that. A lot of it depends on the documents, kind of the precursor documents before that. So once, like I said, we kind of know we're late, so we don't want to rush it across the line just to hit a date and then not have done that whole process enough justice to make it worthwhile. So the plan is I have resources working on it all of 2025. We should be able to make some very, very good progress in that time. The challenge with all of these documents is when you get into the realms of kind of approval and jumping through the different stage gates to get to that approval. And that's where timelines can drift a little, because all it takes is one objection somewhere and then you kind of go back to square one a little bit to start again. But the intention is we're going to make some like material progress in 2025, and the hope is 2025 will be when at the end of is when you'll start to see drafts and things.
Okay, so that will inform the local plan, will it, do you think?
The timelines on those two don't work as well as you would like. Simon Richardson might be able to advise a little more, but the intention is that, yes, they will work closely together.
Okay, great. My final question was about the Section 19s. You said there was about 6 or 7 in progress, and that there was going to be some in the next few days. Do you know, I'm not expecting you to name all of them, but do you know which areas covered by the Section 19s?
Yeah, so there's multiple areas. Brendan is one, Eastern Mordit is another, Stratfield Way, Kettering is another one that's quite high profile. Now you're testing me because I'm getting into the realms of the ones which I've not read recently. But yeah, there are 4 more. Some of which they're all on a kind of a smaller scale. Stratfield Way is probably the most high profile of them all.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks for answering all the questions.
No worries.
Thanks for all your questions, Del. Sorry, Des. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Eastern Mordit, and you just mentioned that. I farm in Eastern Mordit, and we did have the worst floods at the end of September that we've had for, well, at least I can remember, for over 60 years. We had cars swept into the brook, we had bridges swept away, and there was a result of that. The parish meeting has actually appointed several flood wardens. Because we're on a bit of a slope, we've got them scattered. We've got 3 of them scattered through the village to see where the problems emanating from, and of course then it's communication with the vulnerable in the village and those at risk and moving cars and what have you. The easiest thing that residents say is, well, let's just increase the culvert sizes, and as Mr. Cates said, that only takes the the problem a little bit further downstream. I mean, most of my fields already have drainage schemes, and we do keep our ditches and brooks clear. Obviously, it's in our own interest to do that to stop flooding in arable cropping. And although I've mentioned this several times on this committee, and I think everybody else is fed up with hearing about it, although our chairman hasn't. The fact that I direct drill, it doesn't only sequester carbon, it does, if you're not disturbing the soil, you're actually encouraging worms to create worm casts, and that leads to much better porosity on soils, and it's much more managed water going through the soil rather than straight runoff. And where we have to do odd little bits of cultivation, we just logically, we cultivate across the slope rather than up and down. But really, if you're going to get huge downpours, however you work it, and whatever the size of culverts and the problems you've got, you're just going to swamp any system. So there's no long-term solution. But certainly in my 50 years of farming, I'm conscious that weather patterns have and are continuing to change. And I think we've just got to try and plan as far as we can for it. But I think we've just got to accept it's almost inevitable. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thanks, Tim. Ryan, did you want to come back on any of those comments?
Not particularly, apart from thank you very much for taking your role as a landowner and your natural flood management seriously. I wish all landowners were doing the same thing.
Yeah, I can imagine. So thank you for that. It's really, really important part of all of this is going to be working together, isn't it? And getting people to take their own responsibilities. And I was just thinking about the fact that we're bringing the climate change strategy forward, and that we're going to hopefully definitely be moving that forward through the Big 50, which will involve, our businesses, our farmers, our communities, our schools, and so on. It's another really good opportunity to be bringing some of those messages forward. So hopefully, we'll be able to, bring all of these aspects forward as a Northamptonshire community and develop a plan that encompasses flooding as well as everything else. Jan, you have your hand up, and then it'll be Melanie.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick few comments, really. As with my colleagues previously, obviously there's areas that suffer from flooding quite badly, and one place is going from Horby to Gretton, that road there. The farmers done an amazing job down there, and they've cut back culverts, they've dug ditches, they've really done a good job to be able to clear the water. But every time there's any amount of rainwater now, it just floods the fields. Sheep have to be moved. In fact, they moved the sheep right up Rockingham Hill last week. And I didn't know there's anything that needs to be done in terms of, I'm guessing it's an Environment Agency issue, in terms of they just can't seem to, the river there, the stream that floods, and it just covers the whole of land, but it just absolutely floods the whole of the road. And then the runoff water from down Rockingham Hill is crazy, which is why it keeps breaking up all the time and constantly has potholes. And then conversely, you've got Burton Latimer, you go up the Wold there, which is where we've got the wind farm, got quite a few turbines. Used to be used for crops, which, as Tim will know, the absorption rate is much better. And now what we're finding is you come down to the cemetery and there's a pathway there and it's absolutely soaking. And it's a right of way as well across that land. So I just wondered what we can do to mitigate against these things, because if it wasn't for the farmers, I know they've got riparian rights, etc. But if it wasn't for them, then we would not be able to get into some of the villages around here. And I think that's a really big issue for the villages. We can look after our towns. We have problems with, more houses being connected to our network, which causes problems with the sewage, etc. And that's because of a rising water table. And I think that's also a concern, because we've been told that, some of the cemeteries now, you can't dig down deep enough, so we may not be able to use them Is that something that we're looking at, please?
Thanks, Jan. Quite a few different bits there, Ryan, but you were nodding along, so I think you're probably familiar with quite a few of those sites that Jan was talking about.
Yeah, I'll try and pick them up. So I'll start with your your last point. So the cemeteries is not something which we looked at. So if you could ping me an email, Jan, with all of the affected locations which you're aware of, that'd be really useful, and I'll see what I can find out. With regard to Corby to Gretton, we are aware of that issue. The residents in that area are fantastic at reporting the flooding in that location. I think I must have had upwards of 25 to 30 flood reports, which I can't moan about because it's exactly what I've been asking for. So it's awesome that everyone's doing it. So yeah, I'm working closely with highways. I'm also contacting landowners to see what we can do in that area to try and alleviate that issue, because we know it's a recurring issue. Every time it rains, it falls in that location. So we're looking to fix that. I think you raised a third point, but I can't quite recall what it was. The Burton Latimer issue with the
Yeah, the water comes down the Wold because it's the highest point in Burton, and it's where they want to build the energy park.
Okay.
So at the moment, the fields have been left fallow. There used to be crops grown there used to be rapeseed, and there was some wheat grown up there for Weetabix. But latterly, last 2 seasons now, it's been left fallow. So there's a marked amount of water coming down there now, and you can walk through the cemetery, and you walk through. It leads down to an estate, a housing estate, and we had to 4 years ago now. Gosh, time goes quick. We had to take out the play equipment because it was rotten, because it was so wet down there. And they since built another housing estate adjacent to that. So therefore, you've got more of a runoff rate. And what they did was, when they built it, they tried to divert the water, and unfortunately, obviously, water doesn't run uphill, so it just sits in the bottom there, which is why it rotted all the play equipment. And what they've done is they've tried to do it whereby the water runs through what is the play area. Not really a good idea.
Yeah, no, for sure. If I could ask that you ping me an email about that one there as well, just so it's on my radar, because I've got about
Yes,
9
please,
million
because that'd
thoughts
be
on my mind
perfect.
at any one time.
Well, it's having a knock-on effect further down the valley, because you're probably aware of the one where on the bend as you go out of Burton on the right-hand side, just past the farms, you've got a farm on the left. That floods there because, again, that's where all the water's flowing down to into that stream. And so it floods quite badly. So that goes to the back of Bosworth's.
Thanks. So Jan, if you email
So I'll
Ryan
email
about
about
the
all of those.
details of that one, that would be
I will do.
really helpful.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks, Jan. Melanie, your go.
Thank you. Right. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It actually opened my eyes, because I would have said, why can't we have bigger culverts and that? And it does make sense with what you've said. The area in Rushden's slightly different to what everyone else is saying, because the way you've explained it, ours is surface and groundwater, but we have huge issues on Peck Way, which floods quite considerably, and going out on the Earthingborough stretch. Just recently on the road near Asda, we're getting more and more flooding there, which we are aware is associated, which Jan kind of alluded to the ageing pipe system with the Anglia Water, etc. I'm very concerned that with this kind of thing, we're not in control of it. So even if what you're doing, which is amazing work, it won't actually sort out the issues with the flooding due to the eroding pipes. I wondered if you're working together with Anglia Water to see if you can do something. I don't know if that is a valid question, if I can ask it at this point.
Sounds valid to me.
No, it's a valid question. So I'm aware of the issue. I've been having a lot of discussions. There's kind of 2 very similar problems in 2 different locations, but one of which is in Rushden. So I've been having conversations with highways around, and also with operations around maintenance of the watercourse in that location as well. Haven't yet spoken to Anglian Water, but I have contacts within Anglian Water, which I can speak to quite easily and quite quickly. So once we've kind of got our house in order, we will then approach Anglian Water and have the discussion then.
Thank you very much. That's good to hear. Thank you.
Fantastic. Flooding is always an issue that gets people talking, because I think every single one of us has experienced flooding, whether it's personally or because our constituents have come to us to talk to us about it. So, like Melanie, I thought it was, and all the rest of you, I thought it was a really good presentation, because it just laid out some of the facts, making it perhaps a little bit easier for us to understand why things aren't necessarily quite as easy as we might think they are. And I think the three-phase strategy that is being developed, Ryan, sounds really good. I think from my point of view, and I'm sure everybody else's, a strong and thorough evidence base is the underpinning of any good strategy. And I suspect this EAP would be quite keen to see those as they're developed, and get to have a little bit of a look at those and understand them as they're coming forward. So hopefully we'll be able to welcome you back again in the future, Ryan, and have a look at some of that work as it's progressing.
Yeah, for sure. No, that sounds good to me.
Fantastic. Well, it looks like everybody's managed to have their say. So, Ryan, thank you very much for the presentation and for answering all of our questions. You are free to go if you have other things to do, which I'm sure you do. So thank you very much. And we will now move on to our next agenda item, which is Nicole is going to do a bit of a presentation of an overview of the entire program that we've looked at over the last few years, and how that sort of fits into the climate change strategy in terms of the different categories of priorities that have been set in that strategy. So you probably don't want to go through every single bit of the presentation that you've given to us. I'm sure we've had a chance to read it, but if you want to give us a little bit of an introduction, and then hopefully it'll spark some views and thoughts about where we go from there. So over to you, Nicole.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair. Get my screen up. Okay. Everyone see that?
We can.
Okay. So thank you for having me. So as Chair has just said, I'm going to take you through an overview of the proposals that have been brought forward to this committee all the way back to March 2023. So we will highlight some of the progress that's been made to date, as well as some outcomes that have been achieved. The reports have been grouped into that of the categories from the forthcoming climate change strategy. So as a reminder, those are homes and the built environment, energy, transport, nature, food and farming, the green economy, and waste. In addition, we're going to have a little update on the Climate Change Investment Fund, and we will illustrate projects that have been awarded funding, as well as the current remaining spend. And then lastly, we have a high-level overview of the Council's top 10 emitting buildings and the decarbonization pipeline. So first up, we're going to take you through homes in the built environment. So here we have had two reports that have come forward. Both are related to air quality. The first is the Air Quality Annual Status Report, and then the second was the Air Quality Strategy. Both documents have been adopted by the Council and are available on our website. The strategy was adopted back in July 2024, and it outlines the key projects that the Council is undertaking to help maintain nitrogen dioxide concentrations below the UK legal limits. The next one was the status report. So this is an annual reporting requirement. The 2025 report will come forward this summer, and then it will be sent to the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs for approval. For energy, again, we had two items here. The first was the procurement of the energy contract with Laser. So Laser is our energy management provision. And then also we had the options paper for renewable energy. So for item one, as I said, Laser has been procured to manage the gas and electricity provisions for all 4 former authority areas. Whilst the available data has been migrated to the platform, there is some additional work underway to ensure that all of our gas and electricity supplies are correctly accounted for within the system and that all the data held is correct. So Laser is working with our operations team to help ensure that any issues are resolved. For item 2, this proposal went to the executive in September 2023, at which time a decision was made to not to procure, a green energy tariff due to concerns regarding renewable energy guarantees of origin and the reliability of energy produced being green. So instead, a decision was to focus on the direct provision of green energy at council sites via renewables. Next, we have transport. So as you can see, there are quite a few items that have come forward in this category. The first, the electric vehicle infrastructure strategy. The EV strategy has been formally adopted. This occurred in July of last year. A procurement exercise is currently underway to appoint a charge point operator to undertake these works across the authority area, and this is expected to, that supplier is expected to be in place by April of this year. It is anticipated that we will start to see chargers deployed again later this year across the authority area. Positively, the strategy was shortlisted in the 2024 Electric Vehicle Innovation and Excellence Awards. And the next one we have is the Local Cycling and Walking Infrastructure Plans, or LCWIPs, for Kettering, Corby, Wellingborough, and Rushden. So for Kettering, the LCWIP for this area was formally adopted back in September 2023. And since some initial design work has been undertaken on priority schemes. For Corby, again, this LCWIP was formally adopted. This occurred in January of last year. Since then, some initial feasibility assessments have been undertaken on priority schemes, and these have been used to enable some initial design works to progress. Lastly, for Wellingborough and Rushden, this LCWIP is due to go before the executive in March of this year, so more to come on that item. Next up, we have the Hackney Carriages dezoning. This has been ongoing for quite some time, this one. The executive agreed back in June 2024 to remove the 4 Hackney carriage zones from the authority's area and have one zone. In addition to that, the taxi and private hire licensing policy has been reviewed to account for these changes, and as well as other matters that required attention. An application has also been made to the Department of Transport to approve a new set of bylaws for North Northamptonshire. Once approved, the 4 existing bylaws will be revoked. All of this work is projected to take effect on the 1st of April of this year, subject to approval from the Department of Transport for those bylaws. There is also a report that is going before the executive next week on the 13th of February for approval. And then lastly, in transport, we have the Voi e-scooter trial. So this trial continues to be ongoing. The Department of Transport has confirmed that it will run until May 2026. To date, there have been over 1 million rides undertaken within North Northants, and within the last year, usage has increased by 11%. Next up, we have nature, food, and farming. Again, quite a few proposals in this area. The first, we had a presentation from the North Northants Sustainable Food Network. So this network does continue to deliver a range of initiatives across our area. More information regarding the array of activities that they undertake can be found on their website, so I won't go into detail there. Next up, we have the contaminated land and hardships policy. So both of these policies have been formally adopted, and there has been no further action in regard to either. The pollinator strategy has also been adopted, and the principles within this have been taken into account within the operational delivery of our services. Overall, there has been an increase in habitats specifically set aside for pollinators and future tree planting, with an emphasis on early pollen sources for insects. Work is also underway to expand the number of our butterfly banks, and we have secured additional funding to enable the creation of 5 additional banks. Work on this is expected to be completed by the end of March of this year. Next, we have the woodland management update. So this project continues to oversee the active management of several valuable green spaces across our area. Project outcomes supports both the pollinator strategy, carbon management plan, and the local nature recovery strategy through biodiversity enhancements. Some specific outcomes include 25 veteran trees that have been identified and protected from competing growth. Over 2,000 whips are due to be planted this season, and 22 hectares of coppicing have been completed. Next, we have the Greenway strategy. So this strategy was formally adopted in August of 2024, and progress continues to be made in terms of securing funding to enable the delivery of identified routes. Most recently, the team secured Section 106 funding to implement the Washbrook Road ramp in Rushden. Work on this site did commence back in January of this year. The local nature recovery strategy has also made significant progress since it first came to the committee. Following a significant public consultation process and approval of the pre-consultation draft by Natural England, the team have since analyzed all of the consultation data and made appropriate changes to the document and the mapping portal. The updated documents have now been sent back to Natural England for approval. This occurred in January of this year. And then in terms of next steps, a report is scheduled to go before the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee in February. The urban green space audit and strategy. So the audit and strategy informed the identification of a large number of projects, from which 15 projects were approved by the UK Shared Prosperity Fund back in July of 24. These projects cover the urban areas of Corby, Wellingborough, Kettering, Rushden, Desborough, and Higham Ferris, and include play area improvements for different age groups, tree planting, improved walkways and benches, and improved habitats, including woodlands, wildflower meadows, and riverbanks. All of these projects are due to be completed by the end of March this year. And then lastly, in this category, we have the tree planting strategy. So this strategy has been adopted along with information aimed to better inform residents who may wish to plant trees within their gardens. Principles of tree planting have been reflected in our operational delivery of program works, and further engagement with stakeholders continues with the expansion of our volunteer, corporate, and council planting programs. For the green economy, we had 2 items here. So the first was the Decode Corby project, This project was funded by Innovate UK and was led by Electric Places. And its aims to help businesses in the Corby area develop a decarbonization plan for local industry to reduce emissions and transition to a low carbon economy. The project is due to end at the end of February this year, so the end of this month. The next item was the North Northants 2 Net Zero, or NN2NZ Boost for Business program. Again, this is led by Electric Places, and it was funded by the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. The program is designed to assist North Northants businesses to recognize the benefits of carbon reduction. So since April of 2024, when this item came forward, a series of workshops and one-to-one mentoring sessions have been delivered. Expert advice has also been provided to businesses to support applications for additional funding. And then as part of the wider program, we have been able to award 14 businesses with NND Carb grants of up to £5,000, and a further 7 projects have been supported with larger green transition grants, and those range from up to £50,000. For waste, we had 4 items in this category. The first was the Public Spaces Protection Order for dog control. This was adopted back in November of 2023 following a 2-stage consultation process. Next, we had the procurement of contracts for household waste and recycling centers and for general refuse. So this involved the procurement of 2 separate contracts. One is for residual waste disposal and treatment. The other is for operations and management of our household waste recycling centers. So the contracts are on track to be awarded. This is subject to final contract signing. And this is expected to occur in the next month. with activities commencing on the 1st of April this year. Both contracts were procured using a competitive dialogue process in which one of the quality questions assessed was on the bidder's climate change and environmental plans. So it enabled us to understand what those businesses are doing to decarbonize their own operations, as well as what they will plan to do to ensure that our contracts, the emissions from our contracts, are decarbonized throughout the life of the term of the contract. And lastly, we had the environmental crime offenses update. So this policy was adopted back in December of 2024, and it has resulted in new levels for fixed penalty notices for offenses relating to litter, graffiti, fly tipping, and household waste duty of care. It also allows for a discount of 25% for individuals who pay their fines early. Lastly, we have the other category. Here, the proposals have mainly centered around the carbon management plan and the climate change strategy. For the carbon management plan, work on the program continues to progress. As a brief little update, so out of the 94 activities that we now have within the program, 30 have delivered, 53 are in progress, and 11 have not yet commenced. We will be bringing the carbon management plan annual report for 23-24 forward to the executive this summer. The next item is the climate change strategy. So the strategy has been presented to the Place and Environment Scrutiny Committee on the 29th of January without any objections. The strategy is now scheduled to go before the executive next week, so on the 13th of February. Should the executive approve, our next steps will be to begin work on the development of our roadmap to net zero action plan. And as Chair alluded to, this will involve us engaging with the Big 50, as well as community groups and residents across the entire area. Lastly, we have the Climate Change Impact Assessment tool. So the CCIA tool has been in use now for just over a year. Since its adoption, we have had 241 tools that have been approved, the output of which has been used to inform decision-making on strategic capital board proposals, committee papers, projects, and procurement exercises. So that concludes the update on the program. Next, we're going to have a look at the Climate Change Investment Fund update. So to date, we have awarded just over £747,000 for the delivery of a range of activities, which you can see reflected here on the screen. Some examples include provisions of carbon literacy training, so training delivered for our staff. Originally, there was some member training, stock condition, structural, energy, and decarbonization surveys across our state. We've had a fleet decarbonization options report procured, and we've also procured a range of battery-powered hand tools for our ground services team. And additionally, some funding was used to fund an energy officer post for our public sector housing team. So in terms of a quick little bit of progress, so for the fleet decarb report, a formal options appraisal is expected to come forward to the executive this summer with a view of determining the best course of action to decarbonize our fleet. Regarding the hand tools, we have switched out 350 petrol and diesel driven hand tools with two-stroke battery-powered alternatives. Over 30 surveys have been completed across our estate. And then lastly, the energy officer post has now been extended to the end of the financial year to enable work to continue progressing with public sector housing. So the remaining budget for the fund stands at £252,919.50. The team are working with Councillor Harrison to prioritize how best to allocate the remaining funds to greatest effect and aim to bring forward priority bids in the next month. Move on to our decarbonization pipeline now. So this slide here provides an update on our top 10 emitting buildings within the estate. It is reflective of 2023-24 financial year emissions. So as you can see, the Corby Swimming Pool, Haylock House, the Cube, and Warren Hill Crematorium are our top 4 emitting buildings. Work is already underway to decarbonize the Corby Swimming Pool, the Cube, via the nearly 3.9 million in grant funding that has been awarded to the council by the Public Sector Decarbonization Scheme. Work at these sites, as well as the Desborough Leisure Centre, includes the replacement of fossil fuel boilers with air source heat pumps and the installation of solar panels and LED lighting. Once complete, the retrofit works are projected to result in a carbon savings of 690 tons of CO2 equivalent annually, which is about a 3% reduction in the council's carbon footprint. This project is on track to deliver in March of 2026. So the next two buildings in our decarbonization pipeline are Haylock House and Warren Hill Crematorium. Our intention is to submit a funding bid to the Public Sector Decarbonization Scheme with an aim of decarbonizing both sites. The next round of PSDS funding is expected to open this fall for submissions. So officers are currently working to ensure that we have all relevant surveys and design works completed ahead of this bid window. Further decarbonization works will be planned in accordance with our scheduled building improvement works and where funding and resource allocation allows. So that's everything from me. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you, Nicole. I think that just goes to show just how much activity this EAP has been engaged in, but just how much has been going on across the council in the last couple of years. So I've got Melanie's hand up. So Melanie, do you want to kick off with some comments and questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I was going to reiterate what our chairman's just said. Wow, amazing. And it's a shame the world doesn't take a note out of the Book of Northamptonshire to see what we've managed to do. Some positives first. Thank you very much for the greenway slope, hooray. The urban green space. And it's actually really encouraging to see what a knock-on effect these implementations have had, because in Rushden we're planting loads more trees and we've done loads of green initiatives within the council buildings. So thank you for that. I did bring this up the other night actually, Helen, so it won't be a surprise. The food waste, it isn't harmonised across the whole of the county at the moment, and that's a very simple way that we could make a change. And if we can't actually implement it because of financial reasons, could education come in here to actually encourage people to do composting, their own composting in the back gardens, things like that? Because it's a very simple thing instead of putting it into landfill. So there were lots of other things, but it really was. Thank you very much to everyone. It's amazing what we've managed to achieve. Thank you.
Thanks, Melanie. So Nicole, there were a couple of questions there, weren't there? One about composting, and I think Jonathan wants to come in, possibly, on the food waste one. I think I know that there is a plan for us to have food waste collections across the whole of Northamptonshire. And I know that Jonathan will be able to tell us what the date for that is, I'm sure, and how the plans are progressing with that. So perhaps we quickly go to Nicole first on to answer, and then to Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. So we are planning to roll out food waste across the entire authority area. It's a legal requirement now by the government. I think it has to be rolled out by 2027, but last I heard from our waste colleagues, Jonathan can correct me if I'm wrong, but we are intending to roll it out before 2027. I think the deadline is in 2026. Is that correct, Jonathan? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I believe it's March or April 2026.
Yeah,
it's happening. So we're procuring the vehicles at the moment.
And then in regard to education for home composting, so I mentioned this at Scrutiny the other night. We, the sustainability team, are working to develop a resource hub for residents, community groups, and businesses. And home composting is one thing that we have on the resource hub in terms of, recommending that individuals create a home composting heap and giving them links to where they can go find out more about how to do that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nicole. I'm not sure whose hands went up first, but I think it was Tim, and then I think it was Des. So Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I can't quite remember which slide it referred to, but when you're talking about fly tip fines and the 25% reduction for early payment, It's really a question, I think, if you get paid at all, because some of it's catching them, let alone finding them. But I'm just wondering how many would take advantage of a 25% reduction when they're engaged in their criminal activities. That was the first thing. On the list of the costings list of how much money had been allocated to different aspects. Item 10, the options report. I can't remember. I can't read my notes here. Was it 23,000 or 223,000 for the options alone? I thought that seemed quite high. And the one following on from that, the 29 buildings that were surveyed, that worked out at £8,000 a building. And I'm just wondering what's involved in a survey that would justify £8,000. It does sound as if some of these consultants are making quite a lot of money, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, so Nicole, did you have any response to that?
Yep, I can pick those up. So the first one, in regard to how many people pay early, I can ask Waste if they have any statistics on early payers and come back to you, if that's okay, Councillor Alban, on the fixed penalty charge notices. Then in regards to the funding spend, so for the fleet decarbonisation report, that was 22,917.50 pence. So that options report, I know options report sounds like it's not really giving you a whole lot of detail, but it was an extremely detailed report. So they essentially broke down by options. They gave us 3 different options in terms of how we can decarbonize the fleet, costed everything up for us, gave us vehicle specs, all sorts of things. So the report is extremely detailed. So, Jonathan, feel free to jump in here because this was your area, but I feel like that was money well spent considering what we got out of it.
Thank you for that.
That's okay. Jonathan, do you want to add anything on that one?
Only that these things always cost more than you expect in terms of that, and doing the detailed energy calculations. That's the bit where engineers seem to be incredibly expensive, and we do obviously use our own in-house staff to do some of that. But in terms of bringing in and buying in that expertise, that's where the costs do increase, and clearly we've been able to leverage a significant amount of external funding with that spend. And so whilst it looks expensive, the multiplier of what you can leverage in and actually decarbonising the buildings is much more than that initial sort of seed funding we've put in. So nothing more to add on that. But obviously, if you do want more information, we can provide that in terms of exactly what that money is being used for.
Thank you for clarifying that. Much appreciated, both of you.
Not a problem.
Thank
what
you.
Jonathan was referencing there is the buildings, the structural surveys and the stock condition surveys. So that's basically what it is. So we're using them to understand any further building works that need to happen before we can install renewables or heat pumps, that sort of thing. And it's also helping us to have the right surveys in place to complete the public sector decarbonization grant bids when those come forward.
Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Nicole. I think, sometimes it doesn't necessarily sound very exciting, the things we're spending that money on, but it gives us that evidence base, doesn't it? It means that we're ready and prepared to put in for bids and then bring a far greater amount of money to spend on decarbonising our buildings, as the example that Jonathan and Nicole just gave us. I think that's really important. Evidence is everything, and having that ready to go is absolutely vital. Des, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to raise a similar point about the fact that it looks like we've spent £433,000 on surveys out of the million, which obviously I understand the need for the baseline to be got. But then when residents in 2021 went, they're going to spend £1 million on climate change things, and I think the actual stuff on the ground we've got is some battery operated equipment. Obviously, I know that we need the surveys, we need the baselines and all that kind of thing. So I was wondering, I think the question here is like, now we've got all that data, how can you see us using it to be able to decarbonise all the different areas that we've got that data for? That was one of the questions. Obviously, we've got the 252,000 remaining. You kind of alluded to the fact that you've got a few options of what to spend that on. I was just wondering if there's you had any more information on what they were. The climate change impact assessment tool. I remember from your presentation last year that you were having differing degrees of success with getting the different departments on board with it. I wondered if how you'd progressed on that. And what was the other question? Oh, you mentioned the resource hub and home composting. Obviously, I wasn't in the scrutiny meeting the other day, but didn't know if you could expand on what else you've got planned for the resource hub, because that sounds quite exciting.
Sure.
Excellent questions, Des. Nicole, I think you're going to have fun answering all of those.
Thank you. So in terms of what we're doing now with all the surveys that we have, as I said, these are and will be used to help with future grant funding bids, but they're also enabling us to go out and then work to improve those buildings or install renewables where suitable. Jonathan, I don't know if you want to add anything, since it's your area that you're delivering the work within in terms of the survey spend.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So only that if we'd spent the whole £1 million on some solar panels or something, it wouldn't have gone very far in terms of tackling that problem. So I appreciate it's difficult to message that to residents in terms of how we're prioritising that, but the cost of undertaking decarbonisation work is quite incredible, and clearly the information helps us prioritise that in terms of trying to be money well spent rather than otherwise. So yeah, I don't really have much more to add on that, but clearly it's about that seed funding in terms of how we multiply that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jonathan, the fact that we managed to get a grant for the Corby pool, for the Cube, and for a Desborough building. Yeah. For, was it 3.9 million?
3.8, yeah.
3.8 million. So, you know, it does just go to show that, yes, overall we will have spent £1 million on things that don't look very tangible, but as a result of that, we've got 3.8 million in actual decarbonisation projects on our most carbon intense buildings, and hopefully we'll be moving on to Haylock House and the crematorium in the very near future, which might move on to possibly answering what some of your other questions. Nicole, I'll go back to you on those other questions.
So the climate change impact assessment tool rollout, in regard to your question there, yes, all departments are using it. We have worked hand in hand with Democratic Services to ensure that all reports that come forward have a CCIA tool that's been completed, and it's included within the reports in the climate change section, and it's also attached as an appendix item to the committee reports. And the same goes with Strategic Capital Board. There's a place in those reports for the tool to be inserted, and procurement, as well as working with us to ensure that any procurement exercise that comes forward, that comes to them. So smaller value things, it's still up to the officer to complete, but we have had small value things come forward that the tool is implemented in those instances. So overall, I would say, we have a spreadsheet, looking at all the teams that have submitted them, it is dispersed across the organization, which is really good to see. The resource hub, I'll touch on that one. So that is, our intention there is either to add the information onto the council's website, or best case scenario is to have like a microsite where all this information can be housed so that we can update it and keep everything fresh. What will be on the hub is basically supposed to be a one-stop shop for residents, businesses, and community groups to be able to come find information about how to retrofit their homes and their businesses. So right the way down to where they can find trusted suppliers, information about, we have some myth busting things on there in regards to solar, heat pumps, all of that. So we're trying to build it out as much as we can to provide all the information that anybody on the street might want to know about the decarbonization in their daily life. And that also includes links to available grant funding, either via the council or other sources where people can go and get grants to do those retrofit works. So if you have anything you think we might have missed, feel free to send it across to us and we'll get added to our list. In regard to future spend, I'll let Councillor Harrison pick that one up, because that's her decision.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. So we're looking, as we alluded to earlier on, to putting a bid for decarbonisation funds for our next two most carbon intensive buildings. So hopefully we'll be as successful as last time. So we'll use some money towards putting that bid forward, and hopefully we could draw the funds needed to do the decarbonisation of those two buildings, Haylock House and the crematorium. I forget the name of the crematorium, but it was there on the list as I think the fourth biggest carbon use building that we have. So that would be brilliant if we can get the money in for that, and if we did, it'd be as big a success as getting the money for the other buildings that we got, and real tangible progress towards us making a difference to our carbon footprint as a council. I believe that we have a project for one of our leisure centres in Wellingborough, where we can do some decarbonisation work there. It's ready to go and costed up. So that's another project that we are looking at. Then the climate change strategy, once it has hopefully passed next Thursday, whatever it is, in a week or so's time, through the executive, we will want to make sure that it doesn't just sit there, that we work on the plan for the future, and so we'd like to put some resource behind that, so it's not just something that sits there, it's something that we actively work on and move forward with the Northamptonshire community. And then I'm pretty sure there's a fourth thing that we're looking at. Nicole, what's the one I've forgotten? Because this basically, if all of these are approved, it's going to mean that we've spent the whole £1 million. Nicole, what was the final one that I've just lost from my brain in the moment?
It's the Scope 3 reporting tool for procurement. Yeah.
So as you know, that we've done quite a lot of work already on our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, the things that we have far more direct control over. But in order for us to move forward to get to net zero, we need to be looking at our Scope 3 emissions as well. So we're looking to procure a piece of work that will bring us the expertise, because again, we have officers that can do some of this work, but we do need to bring some expertise in from outside, and so that will, again, it'll give us the evidence base that we need. I worry that it'll mean that our footprint will go back up again, but that seems to be what happens. The more knowledge we have, the more we find that our emissions go up rather than down. But we do have to have a proper evidence base so that we can work on genuinely decarbonising for the future and getting to net zero. And again, I think that piece of work, unsexy as it might sound, gives us that evidence base that we can then work for, and apply for funds, help our communities apply for funds, look at how we're dealing with our procurement, and all those sorts of things. So those are the four things we're looking at. We haven't agreed on those yet, but I hope we can get agreement on them, because I think they're all four really good projects, and one of them is really tangible. It's the leisure centre in Wellingborough. At least it gives us something you can say, look, we're actually, we're doing something, so it's not just a plan to plan. So I hope that's helpful, Des.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, guys.
Fantastic. Jan, over to you.
A quick question, Chair. Looking at our carbon footprint, have we noticed whether there's been an increase in tip runs for the garden waste, and more importantly, sorry. Have we even thought about it if we go towards looking at a 3-week cycle for bins, as some people are inferring, because that would absolutely increase our carbon footprint, and then would we have more waste going to landfill, which wouldn't help us at all. The report that we've got here is fantastic, but it's just food for thought for the future, because at the minute, any developments that are put in now, they have smaller bins, even for 4-bedroom family homes, they still have a smaller bin. So I didn't know whether that is increasing our carbon footprint. Do we have data that would convey how many you know, how much tonnage we have now. Well, I know we have that data, but has that been an increase, and is it analysed, please?
Thanks, Jan. Well, I think probably Jonathan would be most helpful in this to answer this question. I think in terms, yeah, I won't try and answer at all. Jonathan, over to you.
Chair, thank you. I'm not sure I can fully answer because it probably be more appropriate for my colleagues in the waste team to give that some consideration. Clearly, as part of the reporting, we do include that waste that we collect from residents in terms of you know, what's left in their refuse bins, but it's probably one that that's more appropriate for my colleagues in the waste team to answer rather than me waffle through some things. So if you're happy, we'll take that away and perhaps come back to you on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I think that'd be really helpful. So Jan, we'll get an answer to you on that one.
No, thank you, and thank you for the report. It's brilliant. What we're doing is amazing. The fact that we've brought in so much money, well done to our teams. They are truly amazing and incredible. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I you know, I have to say, Jan, that if you think about when we first set up this council back in 2021, and Harriet's position was a brand new position, and that at that time there wasn't a dedicated sort of officer base behind it. It's amazing what has been done in the 4 years to date, and the progress that's been made, and that is is it one due to Harriet Pentland, who's been absolutely brilliant, but obviously the amazing officer team that has driven it and got us to this point. So, you know, we've come a very, very long way, and I know we've got a long way to go, but we just got to keep pushing forward and making that progress. So thank you for that. I don't see any more hands up, so I think, Nicole, we've given the reporter a good going over, and I think it's been a really good moment just to look back and just see how much you guys have looked at over the last couple of years, and the input that you have given, I know, has been invaluable and will continue to be. So I think all that remains is to remind ourselves when the next meeting is. Raj, I can't remember when the next one is. Can you just remind us? Oh, never mind. Raj is sort of not paying attention to it. That's no problem. Well, we can look in our diaries and remind ourselves when the next meeting is. So unless there's any last minute questions or thoughts, I think we can close the meeting. So thank you very much. Thanks everybody for your time today, and see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.